The intersection of Black women and democracy, as we know, is not a novel concept. It's so significant for us to continue to amplify the historical landscape.
Black women are the canaries in the mine, and we always have been. She comes from clearly a long lineage, generations of Black women who have done this work. We have a diasporic leadership that we've always had in electoral politics. We can't be on 10 at all times. We actually do have to ask some other folks from other racial and ethnic groups, from other genders, to pick up the slack.
So I hope that there's opportunities for us not only to be in those political seats, but also to sort of influence the decisions that are made on our behalf, whether we're in the seats or not. We're also tired, and I don't think Black women will ever stop.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure for us to engage in this conversation today. We have an amazing group of individuals that are not just smart because they went to school, but they're smart in being able to look at cultural and political phenomena and form these deep opinions based on what Black women do, their lived experience. I am Julia Jordan Zachery. I have the honor and the privilege of being the chair of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Wake Forest University. It is truly an honor for us to be hosting Black Women and Democracy, an intergenerational conversation. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our guests because I do believe that each of us have our own voice and know ourselves well enough to make our own introduction. So, Dr. Christina Greer, since you are not muted, I will start with you. But before we get going, just please let me say thank you. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our attendees. And most importantly, thank you to Sarah Goldstein for organizing this event on Black women and democracy. Dr. Greer?
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you, Julia, for putting this together. I'm Dr. Christina Greer. I'm an associate professor of political science at Fordham University in New York City, and I'm the author of a new book, How to Build a Democracy, from Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan to Stacey Abrams. And so my first book, Black Ethnics, looks at Afro-Caribbeans, Africans, and Black Americans. And my latest book looks at how Black women from the U.S. South have contributed to the formation and foundation of American democracy.
Beautiful. My name is Makeen Zachery. I am a graduate of Barnard College, where I majored in sociology, and I'm also the founder of a platform called Black Girl Culture. It started as a Twitter page and became a website and blog, among other things, in which we talk about a whole range of topics, ranging from popular culture to sort of things that are relevant in our political discourse to, I don't know, hair care. It varies. So happy to be here in good company and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Hello, to echo the sentiments, an honor and a privilege to be here with Dr. Greer, Makeen. Thank you, Julia and Sarah. So grateful. I am Joy Davis. I am a multidisciplinary academician with adjunct professorships at UNC Charlotte as well as Wake Forest. My scholarship intersects women's studies, urban education, and business. I am months away from obtaining a PhD in, yes, in curriculum and instruction and urban education from UNC Charlotte. My dissertation is actually called Scaling the Ivory Tower. So I spend my research centering the high-achieving Black female collegian, examining their academic identity and socioeconomic mobility from an equity lens in critical race, feminism, pedagogy. And so very grateful. I have a few works and publications right now, but it is an honor to contribute to the collective work of Black feminist intellectuals. I'm firm in my belief that women deserve to live wild yet soft, brilliant yet bold. So let's get into it. The intersection of Black women and democracy, as we know, is not a novel concept by any means. When we look to the earliest Black feminist intellectuals, Anna Julia Cooper and the remarkable Angela Davis, their work was grounded in political activism. It was rooted in the overarching desire to see Black women in America operationalize democracy. And so, Dr. Greer, my first question is for you. In your first book, Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream, a remarkable piece I am shamelessly plugging. But you presented a compelling narrative of Black and African American individuals and our democracy. But as we know from Black feminist thought, Patricia Hill Collins theorizes that for Black women, our lived experiences are a criterion of meaning. And so, with that in mind, would you share how Black and African American women entered this conversation around democracy?
I think, we have all these slogans from these past elections, Black women will save us, trust Black women. Black women are the canaries in the mine, and we always have been. So, thinking about someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, who is an activist almost outside of your traditional electoral politics, and someone like Barbara Jordan, who is inside of electoral politics. Now, we have a long-standing tradition of Black women sort of doing the insider and outsider work, which I think is in conjunction, because so much of the outsider work is for us to have a better foundation so we could actually be in the institutional structures to change American democracy from within in an electoral space. So the first book, when I look at Africans and Caribbeans and Black Americans, it's also building on, it's not lost on me that Kamala Harris is of Jamaican descent. Shirley Chisholm, right here, first Black woman ever elected to Congress, was Guyanese. We've got Barack Obama in Kenya and, Colin Powell in Jamaica. So we have a diasporic leadership that we've always had in electoral politics and also in activist politics. When you think about Stokely Carmichael or Marcus Garvey or, or other, leaders from across the country. And we've been in Alaska for 5 generations. So we have a 50-state strategy when it comes to Black activism inside and outside of electoral politics. But this latest book is really sort of tapping into your question, Joy, about sort of I wanted to know someone like Stacey Abrams, because the book is, from Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan to Stacey Abrams. The work that Stacey Abrams did outside of the electoral space, but also inside the electoral space. I wanted to know, where did she come from, right? We're not Cabbage Patch Kids. She comes from clearly a long lineage, generations of Black women who have done this work on a smaller scale. And so as we sort of think about book bans in the 21st century, and it's just like, oh my gosh, they're banning books. They've always banned books. Because there's a reason why most people have never heard of Fannie Lou Hamer, great American that she was. They've never heard of Barbara Jordan, the second Black woman ever elected to U.S. Congress from the great state of Texas, right? They've never heard of most of Septima Clark, Ella Baker, women who literally gave their bodies, their minds. We've reduced Rosa Parks to the pretty lady who sat at the back of the bus. We don't talk about the fact that she was a rape investigator, putting her life in danger to actually investigate what happened to Black women all across the U.S. South. So I think, as we zoom out and sort of try and contextualize the moment we're in, we've always been in this moment where Black women have had to fight to sort of get our voices to the top of the table. Now, we tell people what's ahead. We show them in the documents that are, hey, you're in danger, girl. America, you are in danger. We keep telling you, because if it's a recession for you, it's a depression for us. So we try and actually alert the larger groups, plural, as to what lies ahead. But as we know, you don't have to be a man to subscribe to patriarchy. And this is where our feminism and our sisterhoods fall apart at times, and have fallen apart several times, and they continue to do so. We're not scratching our heads. We've seen it. So
Absolutely.
in this moment, as I wrap, I just think that we come from a long tradition of this work, whether it's when we were, in chattel slavery or post Reconstruction and Jim Crow, where we have been doing this work consistently. It's just with the lack of widespread attention to the specific women in very regional contexts who have been doing this. And this is why the scholarship of, I would argue, Dr. Jordan Zachery, and your future scholarship, my contributions to the canon, I wanted to make sure Stacey Abrams was on record in Black and white as we slowly erase Black women from the larger American narrative. I wanted it to be in print that she helped deliver Joe Biden to the White House. I wanted it to be in print that she helped to deliver 2 U.S. senators to the state of Georgia. Because as we get farther and farther away from her first big run in 2018 and her second run that wasn't as successful in 2022, fewer and fewer people know the contributions of Stacey Abrams because she didn't win. And so as we still try and get our first Black female governor in any state in the union, it's important for me to sort of document history, even if we don't get across the finish line.
Absolutely. And it's so significant for us to continue to amplify the historical landscape. And so I'm so glad that you did that, just even in answering the last question. But in both of, in both of your pieces of literature that you have written on, on Black ethnics, on political activism, amplifying, the U.S. South, it's so important that we recognize those who have already contributed and are continuing to do so. And so this next question is for both of you as we look ahead. How do you envision the future of democracy evolving for Black women? What role do you see them playing in shaping the future? And for you, Dr. Greer, governance, and for you, Makeen, for social justice?
It's a big question. I hope that, I mean, I have my hopes and then I have my more pessimistic perspective on what the reality of that might look like. So maybe I'll start with the brighter side of things, and that I do hope that it's not just listen in theory and in sort of in celebration on social media to Black women, but also sort of listen in political decisions that are being made, both in voting and then also what the decisions that people are elected by us make. So I hope that there's opportunities for us not only to be in those political seats, but also to sort of influence the decisions that are made on our behalf, whether we're in the seats or not, beyond the extent to which has been true to date. I mean, I hope that it's not something that we're continuing to just pour into this system that is not returning to us. So in the same vein, I hope that we're able to not just point people to the white people to vote for and hope that once they're elected, they're thinking about us, but really sort of that there is active partnership, that people are putting us in their cabinets and their strategy teams and whoever sort of is behind the scenes of the elected people that we see. I hope there's some opportunity for us to be present and vocal in those rooms, and also both as decision makers, not just as sort of influencers. My fear is that, as you mentioned, people have short memories, and the internet specifically is a really good tool for informing us about those histories that we've talked about already, that we don't sort of give enough credit to as informing our future next steps. In that regard, the internet has been a good tool for me and sort of serving as an archive for people that I didn't know. So, keeping Rosa Parks in mind, I had no idea who Claudette Colvin was, in the fact that she, did the bus boycotts 9 months prior to Rosa Parks. And so I thank the internet for pieces of knowledge like that and how they might inform what I do. And I also look to the internet, as well as many other folks in my generation and beyond do, for how I can sort of pick up those pebbles left behind by people in history for us to continue the fights that are ongoing. I guess my fear is that people are tired, and not just white people or people who are sort of allies to Black people and Black women, who we know have sort of expressed fatigue since 2020, which is funny from our perspectives. But I think we're also tired, and I don't think Black women will ever stop. But I do wonder where that fatigue goes, especially when it feels as though we keep losing. And so I actually do appreciate, Dr. Greer, what you said about, there is still work being done, even when we're not sort of winning the big races or the big fights, there is still change happening. And I think sort of thinking about the internet again, given that that is often my library at times, I think it's helpful for us to use it as a tool to sort of take us to those grassroots people that are doing the work, even when it seems like the work has been paused, because there are people that don't sort of mark their progress by, I don't know, democratic elections and election cycles, and sort of are doing the work year round regardless.
I mean, I agree completely. Makeen, I think what gives me hope and optimism in this vein is the micro happiness. So it's like it is young people doing the work. I do think the internet is a tool, but it's not the only tool, right? So there's a reason why I've got like 3 levels of books behind me, because, I sometimes would just open up these books. We have to understand what we did in the past and what worked and what didn't work, so we can figure out coalitions that we might want to tap back into, or things that we want to stay, strategies we want to stay away from. I think as we move forward, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think Black people are accustomed to a marathon. There are a lot of people who are just now waking up like, I didn't win. I'm tired. I give up. It's like, you can't. That's not how it works. But most people have never actually experienced a discomfort. They've never experienced not getting what they wanted. They've never experienced someone who's taking something away from them. And Black folks are like, well, welcome to the party. It's called America. And so how do you keep people engaged? How do you help them understand a reality that our histories are inextricably linked? Just because most white people know nothing about Black people and they're just now starting to get little glimpses. It's like, yeah, look alive, right? We have to know everything about you and about us to survive, let alone thrive in this country. You're just now actually going from black and white to color. You're not even in HD yet. And so how do we sort of continue to engage and educate and build coalitions and get disappointed with coalitions that we thought we had and questions that we thought were asked and answered, and then we realized or not? I think what also gives me hope is that young people are sort of saying, like, I need rest. And sometimes I'm like, okay, kids, y'all haven't even been working, but like, sure, get back to it. But each generation recognizes they don't have to grind themselves into dust the way their grandparents or great grandparents did. And the only way that we can be of service to do this project, to engage in the democracy building exercise, is if we actually do rest. And there's a lot of literature by Black women where rest as resistance, seeing ourselves in the future. Seeing ourselves in the future is, we can list so many Black women from the civil rights movement who died before 65, right? Because they ran themselves into the ground. It's hard work. We see Dr. Jordan Zachery and I, we see Black women in academia. We've got good jobs. We've got insurance. Like, by and large, this is good living. We're not in fields like a lot of our ancestors, but we're not making it to old age. And so what is it about this country that these conversations that are wearing us down to the bone? And so really being honest with ourselves and our other Black women about the fact that, like, we can't be on 10 at all times. We actually do have to ask some other folks from other racial and ethnic groups, from other genders, to pick up the slack, because Black women can't save this whole democracy. We can hold it up as much as we can, but like, that is not a long-standing strategy. It has been the strategy that most people are comfortable with, but it is not the long-standing strategy that we should continue.
I'm glad that you said that, Dr. Greer, because there's these two schools of thought that you essentially mentioned. My co-author, Dr. Deborah Smith, and I are working on a manuscript right now, a book called Soul Labor. But what we say is it's not labor, it is love. And so then you have that frame of reference, right? As you mentioned, rest is resistance, soul labor, it is not labor, it is love. But then, however, we still have, text by Mickey Kennedy and Hood Feminism, where she says it's past time to make the conversation nuanced, inclusive, and an intersectional one that reflects the concerns of all women, not just a privileged few, is what she says. And so we have these two schools of thought, in that, yes, we're tired. We're very tired. However, we are still here and firmly planted. And I think it requires a reimagining of how we have been exercising democracy. And so my question for you all is, in what ways can we make political education for Black women accessible to ensure that they have the tools to navigate and influence the democratic process, one that does not wear us down, right? However, one that ensures that it reflects the concerns that we have. And again, to Mickey Kennedy, not just the privileged view.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to punt that to Makeen. And before I do, I'll just say this. One, I believe in political tithing. And so that's contributing to institutions, organizations, and individuals that I want to see thrive. We do this with our religious institutions. I do it with politics and organizations that are doing that. I really do encourage Black women to run for office. A lot of people are like, I want to be president. It's like, I'm not asking you to be president. But that, like, local water board in your county that actually has a lot of power and influence over what happens to you and your family, like, that actually is a way for a lot of people to be in electoral politics in a way that, you don't have to be a state senator and go to your state house. There's thousands and thousands of local seats that just kind of also most people run and never actually have competitive races. So in that electoral politics space, I really do encourage Black women to see themselves as stewards in a different way. So you're still doing the labor of love, but it's a way that we can have like a mixed class conversation too about people who are contributing to their communities, especially the hyper local, because that's where a lot of the action is. I'll defer to Makeen as to the ways that we can use technology to connect us. I think sometimes, at least as an educator, I see technology pushing my students farther and farther away from one another. And I'm like, you were sitting shoulder to shoulder with someone who could be your future best friend. Why are you on your phone texting someone else? Like, I want us to engage. So I think that there are a lot of ways that we can get creative, especially with the federal government coming down and taking away so much. I think there's a real opportunity for us to come together and recognize, like, okay, so if we can't have it officially in schools or we can't have it officially in work, then maybe we figure out social ways or other ways outside of these institutions where we can actually build our own modes of education, connection, and coalition building.
Absolutely. And Makeen, can I ask you, when you do address and answer the question, since this is an intergenerational conversation,
Mm-hmm.
um, it would be wonderful, especially with your platform, Black Girls Culture, that is so robust, representative of a wide range of Black women. But would you share, when you're answering this question, how you see it from the lens of a millennial and Gen Z women expressing, their political agency and certainly using technology and as you have, right? And building community and all of those things.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely can't speak for all of Gen Z, but I'm happy to share what I do know. I think the question was how we can improve political education, correct? For Black women.
Absolutely. And if you even want to add on the ways in which, that you have increased your civic engagement through your platform, this will be a wonderful time, I think, to tie that in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things that come to mind. I think one is sort of the sharing of information and knowledge and arming people with the things they need to know. And I'll go into each of these a bit more. I think two is also just building community so that people have spaces to ask questions and to sort of compare notes and to, I don't know, collaborate in certain ways and to organize as well. And then I think finally it is taking it offline to some extent or another. You have to think about what the local impact is for you. Or the thing that the internet has been really helpful for me is in the introduction of things that I didn't know. So I've learned about a lot of, I learned the term grassroots organizing from the internet. I learned about the Combahee River Collective. But I think you start there, but you can't end there, I think is what I've had to teach myself. It's very easy to go off of an Instagram infographic or even just a headline of something and not click into it and read it and sort of go further. Or maybe you're even reading an article on something, but not knowing that there's a number of books fully written over periods of time about this specific topic. So I think it's using it as a starting place and not an ending place for your building of your own familiarity with things is one. And particularly in regards to political education, I think it's also really helpful to just know what your rights are. I think I've learned a lot about voter restrictions in school, sort of as something that was like in the past. There was gerrymandering before, there was this XYZ in the civil rights era and in Jim Crow, but not knowing how those things carry through or also how you can sort of spot and recognize them are those like sort of quick, maybe more easily accessible things that I think everyone needs to know. And so I think it also helps to sort of demystify and to remove sort of that language that might cause fear in people around certain topics. I think the second thing is that I mentioned was community. I have really become familiar with sort of grassroots organizing efforts through social media and also found ways to sort of plug in myself, be it in sort of meeting with people on Zooms, be it in meeting with people in real life. I mean, we saw that like Zoom, I mean, we could discuss that. This is another topic, but that Zoom that happened when Kamala announced that she was running, which Black women got on Zoom and raised, I think, $1 million in 10 minutes. And so it is very much connected. And this is real money that you can move through things. And there's real sort of, I don't know, things like mutual aid funds that you can sort of become plugged into that are strengthened by digital communities, I find, in ways that you might not be able to sort of have the same reach with just the folks that you know in your real personal world. But again, connected, the money is eventually going to someone real. I think I've had my own experiences with fundraising online, and it's weird because it feels like, what is this tweet going to do? What is this, DM going to do? But then next thing you know, you've raised 25K and it's, even though you're not seeing the people that it's interacting with, it can feel very like, I'm just on my phone. But I think that's even more of a reason to do it. It feels a lot more easy to do that way. You're not having to come up with a physical space and convince people. You still have to have the same messaging and clear vision for what you're doing, but it requires a bit less labor when it's with the devices you already have and use all the time. So I think that's one example of how you might think about sort of tapping into digital communities, not to divide us, but to rather sort of get us on the same page and sort of collaboratively working towards something. I think the last piece that I might say, sort of to the point that you both made about like sort of local elections and sort of local electoral politics, is also just community involvement. This is not necessarily a political or an inherently political thing in the way that I might always think about political engagement. But I've recently joined, I talk about this all the time, so anyone that's spoken to me has heard about this, but I joined my block association in Brooklyn, and it's me and like all of these old ladies that have lived on my block for, I don't know, 50 plus years. And I've actually learned a lot about local politics in New York outside of, beneath the mayoral race of like what's actually happening, and sort of getting to meet with my local district representatives one on one when we invite them to our meetings at the library, and just sort of getting an idea of what's on their minds. What are they sort of up against? Who is pushing these policies that I'm hearing about, at a really high level on CNN, but not sort of getting an understanding of the things that are sort of up for discussion on each of those. So I think that strikes a few points. It's one, sort of being involved on a local level, and also sort of being involved intergenerationally has been really special for me too, in that I have accepted that I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know a lot. And part of that is just because I haven't been here long enough to know everything. And part of that is I haven't seen all of the other things yet. And so trying to surround myself with people who know different things than I do in a way that I don't think the internet always allows us to do. I would not find these women on my Twitter timeline, but and they wouldn't want to see me there, but they would love to see me at the Block Association. And those little conversations that happen sort of bring to mind opportunities for us to sort of love on someone that needs it in our community, what be it someone that's apartment has burned down or whatever, at a super, super local level, but also to sort of help campaign for someone that's sort of looking to knock out a legacy politician out of a local seat. So there's different levels to it all, and I think they all are connected. But again, I think, as I said at the beginning, sort of using the internet as that like launching pad, it might be the introduction, but should not be sort of where you end. And using it to sort of compare notes with people about what's possible has been really helpful for me.
Absolutely. I think one of the pieces that's really significant about what I just heard you say, Makeen, is that these intergenerational conversations, they are significant and pivotal, excuse me. As an emerging scholar, even in the academy, the conversations that I have with my mentors, right? And their experiences are so significant, but then the connections that I have with my students may be different, and propel us further. And so I'm glad that you shared about what you're doing on your block in Harlem with the little old ladies. I bet they are remarkable.
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn.
It's not the same.
I'm glad that you're doing this. This is wonderful. Both of you have mentioned in some way, shape, or form that, of course, we know, even though this conversation is about Black women, Black African-American women in democracy, but we cannot do this work alone, right? We know Audre Lorde said that we have to seek our allies in common cause. And so before I move into discussing some racial and gendered stereotypes that affect Black women, I just want to ask this question. How do we constructively utilize our allies to increase our political agency?
So I'll start really quickly. I think that, we have to be honest about the healing that needs to happen from this past election. I think a lot of folks thought that there were some coalitions, long-standing coalitions that had been built that were unbreakable, and we were moving in a particular direction. And I think the literature and the data from the 2024 election showed us that Black women are the feminists, right? I mean, they vote for female candidates. They are the keepers of democracy and the Democratic Party. And the second greatest group, the second feminist group, are Black men. Regardless of the rumors and all the conversation, it's like they doubled down. They voted at greater rates than white women, definitely. Latinas, Asian American women, and then all the men to the side. So we have to recognize that there's a racial conversation that has to be had. And so when Black women are looking around to build coalitions with other women, we have to remember that white women have never voted for the Democratic Party candidate. Only 2 times they've done so since we started collecting data as political scientists in 1952. They've only done it in 1964, LBJ, my favorite president, and second term Bill Clinton, 1996. Other than that, white women vote for Republicans. They are the keepers of patriarchy, right? The same way you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist, you don't have to be a man to uphold patriarchy. So this idea that we are looking for coalitions with white women in mass is false, right? Even when it seems in the news stories that it's going to go one way, and it doesn't. And it hasn't gone that way with Latinas by and large, and it's not going that way with Asian Americans. And it seems as though we're getting farther and farther away from coalition building in a lot of ways. And so I think we have to be honest about some of the hard conversations about what happened in 2024, what people told themselves so they wouldn't vote for a Black woman as an executive. The fact that we've never had a Black female governor should tell us something. We've had Black female mayors, but we know a mayor is not a governor, and all states are red states. It's just blue cities, right? And so many people couldn't do it. They had Project 2025. They saw the damage that could be done in second term Donald Trump. He told them what he promised he was going to do. I will deport your family. I'll deport you. I'm going to fire you. I'm going to take away your job. I'm going to make sure that, I tank the economy. All these things he told you, but you told yourself it was about eggs. You told yourself it was about her laugh. You told yourself it was about some foreign policy of a country that you can't find on a map. So here we are. And now folks are like, Black girls, save us. And it's like, right. So now we're in the find out phase of you messing around. And now we have to build these relationships. But I feel some kind of way about what you did to me because I told you what was going to happen consistently. And so as we move forward, and I'm always, this is why I love intergenerational conversations, because everyone's like, Christy, you're so optimistic. I am optimistic because there's a ton of Makeens out there. We just have to support them and nurture them and help them remember how brilliant they are, even though they don't know everything. It's like, no. We just need time. So we have to pour into them. That's why I'm perpetually optimistic. But I think we have to be honest about, as we are moving forward and we're mentoring and we're pulling people in, we also have to realize there's a lot of hurt that's going along where some younger people are looking at me like, why would they do that? I genuinely don't understand. And I'm like, well, we got to read some of these books to help us understand why it's happened this time, why it's happened last time, why it's happened the time before that, and the time before that, and the time before that, and why it keeps happening, no matter how we explain it to our friends over there.
We cannot ignore the massive patriarchal construct that this political landscape is under. We can't ignore that. And
Bell Hooks reminds us, right? She said this country is predicated on 4 things, and I talk about it in the book: white supremacy, anti-Black racism, patriarchy, and capitalism. Those
absolutely.
at the table, they're encapsulated in the current occupier of 1600 Pennsylvania, right? And so if we know that this is the foundation of American democracy, white supremacy, anti-Black racism, which is not the same as white supremacy, it's something a little special and different, patriarchy, and a racialized capitalism that affects all of this, then I think it explains this moment we're in, but it also explains the foundation that we're constantly trying to work against.
Correct. Yeah. And hence the reason why we're having this conversation. The soul, what did Bell Hooks tell us? The soul of feminist politics is the commitment to ending patriarchal domination. And so with that in mind, Makeen, I don't know if you were wanted to offer that answer as far as allyship, but certainly if, if you do, go right ahead. If not, I'll move on. I see your face.
I don't have much to add. You got it. I feel similarly.
Well, I will say this, with the policies that affect Black women, we know that they differ from those that affect other communities. And so what are some examples of policy shifts that have had a positive impact? Because again, we're looking to be a realist, however, advance and so move away from a deficit-focused lens. And so what are some examples of policy shifts that have had a positive impact on Black women's rights and empowerment?
You think in modern day or in the past?
I would say collectively. I would ask more specifically, maybe modern day, because again, maybe we need this lens of optimism, Dr. Greer. And so perhaps if there are any that, that you can think to, and then I think Makeen, even from the standpoint of, of women's empowerment that you have seen even in recent years, that have been really tremendous.
Yeah. So I'll say this. All these policies are on the chopping block. All progress that has been made in the past quarter century, right? Or half a century. All of it is up for grabs. All of these things that we thought we had resolved, we haven't. And mind you, we're working already from a deficit. We're from a racial deficit and a gender deficit because of the racial constructs of this country. And so just think about Black women being excluded from the New Deal, right? We're by and large domestics. When Black women worked outside the home, Southern compromises. Let's just make sure domestics don't get Social Security benefits. So now we've got a 100-year deficit, economic deficit, because we haven't been able to invest, let alone we couldn't buy in certain neighborhoods, we couldn't have houses, we didn't get the GI Bill, all of these economic things that explain the lack of wealth in communities. So here we are. But I would say something like, Joy, even something as minor as, say, the Crown Act, right? Where Black women could wear their hair, how it grows out of their head and get a job. We had to legislate that. Remembering that any freedom we have in this country is because we took to the streets and then we had to go to court and then we had to have it legislated just to purely exist. So I think that, rollback. We know that's going to be a rollback. Any
100.
protections to make sure that, Black women in the workplace or, things that policies that sort of help all women, right? And Shirley Chisholm, obviously, when she was in the State House in New York, was like, this helps all people. Like, if it helps women, it helps communities, right? Obviously. But, like we have universal 3K in New York, for example. That helps people be able to like stay in the city so that they can work, right? Being able to put your kid in a good public school at the age of 3 as opposed to waiting until 5. That helps people have a little bit more money in their pocket and not spend thousands upon thousands of dollars in childcare, for example. I do worry though about diasporic Black women who may be undocumented, who live with other Black people who are hyper policed. My state senator just told a story about when he was growing up. He had asthma, his parents were undocumented. They took him to the hospital when he had an asthma attack. We're going to see more and more Black women from marginalized communities, especially undocumented communities or mixed status families, who won't go to the hospital because of some of the policies that are coming through. And there were policies that would say, come one, come all, right? Like we are actually welcoming. So I think we've had a lot of strides, but as a reminder, everything in America is an ebb and a flow. We progress and we regress. And this is why we have to sort of rest and recognize that like nothing, even things that we thought were resolved are never resolved in this country because it can always be taken back. And when we know history, we've seen it happen time and time again after Reconstruction and Jim Crow and so progress with civil rights movement and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the Immigration Act. And so I think just the vigilance of what is happening so we can organize ourselves and figure out some of it will be in an electoral space, but some of it will be in a hyper local space as well. And that's okay to sort of, have some of these battles in a very local space.
Absolutely. And because Dr. McGreer addressed policies, Makeen, let's look at the racial and gendered stereotypes that affect how Black women are treated within democratic institutions, and how these stereotypes can be dismantled, and that whether it be, social media, whether it's technology, or grassroots, collectively, but how do these racial and gendered stereotypes that affect Black women, and affect how Black women are treated within democratic institutions, from voting to public offices, but just in general, how do you think these stereotypes can be dismantled?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I'm thinking a lot about what Dr. Greer said earlier about the stories people told themselves about Kamala Harris as to why she wasn't qualified. And so I guess what that takes me to is like my previous response to a question like this might have been how we might sort of unteach those conceptions of Black women in non-Black women's perceptions of us. But now I think it's more important to sort of empower ourselves with knowledge of our own histories and of our own capabilities and of the tools and resources that we need wherever we need them so that we have the confidence to proceed. We can be perfect and they'll still find a reason to sort of convince themselves that we're not qualified or the best person in the seat. Like this election was the perfect example of that. I mean, not perfect in that it was horrible, but it was perfect in that it illuminated what a lot of us already know about the whole, 3 times as good perception. I guess my thought about where stereotypes are most harmful are when they're internalized. And it only does so much for us to unlearn it ourselves. Again, it's not going to get us across the finish line to believe that we are as great as we are, but it does get us a lot further than when we don't know those things. And when we don't know things like our own histories, and also when we don't know the things like the policies that are happening to us, when we feel like we're sort of outside of the door looking in, even if we don't have the ability to make decisions, we are still sort of made better and strengthened when we at least know what's going on and know sort of what people are doing to resist it so that we can do it collectively. So I guess to me, it's beyond just any one stereotype, but it's more about the belief of self and the belief of collective action and where it might get us so that people don't see a lost election and think that, all of the work is done and that we're starting from scratch. And so that people don't see, a local election not going their way or the rollback even of certain acts that have benefited their lives as the end of the line. And so that we know things like Dr. Greer said about this being a marathon and that these are sort of the types of walls that we've come up against before. And we overcame them then and we will eventually overcome them here. And it might not look the way that we thought they might, but sort of I think it's unlocking that perception of possibility of self and of collective action that is most important to sort of resist any, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, be it a stereotype, be it imposter syndrome, be it whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
The things that hold us back from at least trying, because a lot of the progress that we have seen and a lot of these sort of acts that we at least, have gotten across the line have been because someone tried. And of course there's more work involved in it than that, but imagine if we didn't even get to that stage. I imagine how much less progress we would have seen already. So empowering people to know that they have the information that they need, the knowledge that they need, the familiarity of the world that they need to sort of implement change, whatever that might look like, be it on a local level or a grander scale, I think is really important. And I think it's done by teaching people their history, by sort of creating forums and spaces for people to bounce ideas off of each other and share experiences and to sort of compare notes about how, one act of resistance in my community went, and here's what I learned, and here's how you might sort of not run up against the same roadblocks that I did when I tried it. I think those are the conversations that are most useful so that we don't feel stuck.
Can I just add something really quickly to what Makeen said? One of the key things that I pulled from what Makeen just laid out so eloquently was imagination.
Mm.
And I think, for so many of us, we're working so hard and we're like beaten down by, the losses and the losses, that sometimes it's hard to have the imagination of what could be. And I think to the crux of this whole conversation, that's where the intergenerational conversations are really, really important. Because
Absolutely.
I mean, this is why I love teaching. I think that's the beauty and privilege and honor, and it's like the best kept secret of being a teacher, right? And a
Yes.
professor, is because being with young people, they have sometimes an imagination about something because it's new to them. And it's, you know, I have my script, I teach the same classes, I've read these books over and over again. Sometimes it's hard to see something new
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
system that feels so
Mm-hmm.
calcified.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this country backwards and forwards, and she doesn't surprise me anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she disappoints me, but she doesn't surprise me. But sometimes it's young people who are like, well, what if we tried this? And it's like, that actually isn't in any books that I have actually ever read. And maybe your imagination of what the future could look like. I mean, this is why I think Afrofuturism is so attractive to a lot of people in this moment,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because it helps us sort of think about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer, for that. We are moving to the question and answer portion of our conversation. So we have discussed unlearning, unpacking, healing, allyship, intergenerational conversations, rest, resistance, reimagining. Thank you so much, Dr. Greer Makeen, for contributing to these conversations and these very, very significant themes that are necessary. Do we have any questions? I'm looking inside the chat to see if I see any questions there. And I welcome you to come off of mute. If that's an option as well. Sarah, I don't know that it is, but
Someone
I
said the chat
see
is disabled.
Khalees. Oh, the chat is just okay. Okay. Khalees raised her hand. So if you would like to come off mute, and you are more than welcome to address the panel.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it didn't have an audio option for me, but thank you for allowing me to speak today and ask my question. And thank you to the panelists for this amazing conversation. So my name is Khalees. I am a research associate at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. And I'm a early career scientist. So my work focuses on environmental justice, specifically beauty justice within the space for Black women and other women of color. And my question to the panelists was, being so young, I'm specifically 22 years old, I wanted to know, what advice would you give someone like me? Because this field I've been working in for about 2 years. I graduated last year and I was like, I want to take a gap year because it's a lot and I wanted to grow. And being in this space and working with different local organizations. And I even recently went and talked to legislators in Albany, New York, to discuss these bills that we have and that we're trying to push to get passed. It can just be very challenging. And right now, seeing like the changes that are happening at the federal level, understanding further, like, why do I have to advocate for clean beauty initiatives for, women of color and for America? And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to say a few things. One, since you're at Mailman, I would find Nayo Kwate, who's a professor, and also Sam Roberts. They're both at Mailman Public School, both Black professors. And I think, just tap into them and they'll put you on your way. Two, you're in your 20s. I always tell people, work really hard in your 20s. Your 20s are cheap. They're like roses, right? You can tell people who worked really hard in their 20s versus people who you know, took a vacation. Because when you're in your 30s, all of a sudden you have like a foundation and other people are sort of scrambling. So work really, really hard in your 20s and recognize that like this stuff is like it's new to you, but it's not new to the country, right? And so surround yourself with people who can like keep you laughing, not all the people in your same sort of professional set, so that you can kind of keep some perspective. As you get older, real life also starts to happen. So you recognize that work is incredibly important, but like it's really at the end of the day, it's really about building substantive relationships with your family and friends and asking yourself, what did I contribute to my community? And that's community, 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 like the small and the really large. And if you can constantly check in with yourself and be happy with what that answer looks like while maintaining really solid friendships, because those friends are going to become family as you lose family members as you get older, that's kind of the North Star. All the other stuff just kind of falls into place.
Do we have any other questions? It looks like we have one in the chat. What advice would you give to young Black women navigating a PWI? While Makeen is frozen, I can help to answer some of those questions as well. Dr. Greer, do you want to go first?
Oh yeah. I mean, I went to Tufts. I went to Columbia for my PhD. I don't call it a PWI. I call it an HWCU. So some people went to HBCUs, it's the Black Colleges and Universities, Spelman, Howard, Hampton, Morehouse. I went to, and those universities are set up for the production of Black knowledge. I went to HWCUs. I went to universities that were set up for the production of white knowledge for white people. And I somehow got in over the 100+ years that they've existed. So recognizing that if the institution isn't set up for you, there's going to be but so much that you are integrated in 100%. But they're always good people. So look around and find them. And everyone can teach you something, even when it's someone that's like, I don't want to be that person when I get older. It's fine. But there is something for each person to tell you. You're not here to, not everyone's going to be your best friend, but there might be 5% of a professor or a classmate that you can learn from. And it's like, take it. And you're here not to stay forever. You're here to get this information, recognize that you come from strong ancestors who have gotten you to this point. So you get in, you take all the tools and the information that you need, and you get out so you can go do something with it for people who will treat you possibly a little bit better than the people who treated you inside those walls. That's that.
That was wonderful. Makeen, welcome back. I was going to answer in your proxy. The question in the chat was, what advice would you give to young Black women navigating a PWI? I'll chime in quickly, and then Makeen, if you want to answer that, because I know you experienced a PWI in undergrad. I did as well at UNC Charlotte. It's now considered a HWI, but my research is actually centered on that experience for African American women. And find community. And that's all I'm going to say. Dr. Greer leaned into that in her answer, but that is what I have heard repeatedly from my own research subjects, is that if they have community and advisors and Black female professors, that they feel a sense of commonality, a sense of strength, a collective sense of resilience in sometimes what can be a very racist and oppressed and marginalized environment. Makeen, if you had anything to offer to that, that would be wonderful. But I think this next question may be great for you. Can I read that one out? While there is a lot of optimism in young people that comes with youth and inexperience, there's also a lot of pessimism. How do you manage to reach a generation where many have simply checked out?
To the PWI thing, I just echo everything that's been said. I think you can have an HBCU experience at a PWI if you're really intentional about it a little bit. Obviously not the same. I would never compare them, but I'll just leave you with that. I think being in Boss at Barnard, which was the Black Organization of Soul Sisters, since been renamed, but still has the same purpose, was really important for me in connecting with Black alums and connecting with sort of Black people, whether or not they were in my classrooms. So I think that was really important to like keep me through it and make sure that I didn't feel alone. And also like sometimes you just have those moments to look at each other and be like, wasn't that crazy? So those are really helpful.
And I'm not crazy.
Right, exactly. And then the last question was reaching a generation that has sort of checked out, presumably this generation or maybe even Gen Alpha that is on its way up. I think it's connecting it to the real world is always really helpful. I think something that can be scary and also exhausting about topics like this is that they can feel very distant from people. And also, I think it's on purpose that we don't always know how policy connects with our day to day, which is why people can argue that they think, I mean, not, that's not fully why, but it might be part of why people argue that like eggs is what is at top of mind for them and not all this other stuff about economics, because eggs is a lot easier to talk about than, I don't know, anything else that might be a bit more nuanced. So I think it's really connecting what people are seeing on the news and the headlines to sort of what people are experiencing day to day. So I remember even something as simple as like understanding the cost of healthcare and sort of medications was one conversation. But once I found out how much, elders in my own family were being charged for things like this that they needed to survive, it shifted something in me. And I think you don't always have that personal connection, but finding opportunities to sort of make it less of a big, lofty idea and more of a real life day-to-day thing that we're already dealing with, whether or not you choose to check out, I think is a shift that can be made.
Certainly. Wonderful way to address both of those. And it looks like we do have time for another question. We did touch on allyship inside of the panel, and so we can appreciate that there's a question, how to deepen, it seems, someone's ally. How can I, as a 20-year-old white woman, be an ally in the fight for justice that Black women are enduring? I will give this question to either of you.
Yeah, I'll say this. One, read. Two, my mom used to always say this. We hosted a lot of parties growing up. And what would drive her crazy was, we got a whole bunch of people coming at 7 o'clock, right? And the house needs to get done. And when I would come up to her and it's like, so what needs to be done? She was like, look around. Look around. Trash cans, vacuuming, dusting, beds made, put out the food. Like, there are certain things where I actually do implore people to look around. Is it talking to your own family members when you hear them say certain things? Is it sort of combating what you know? It's just, there's opinions and there's facts. They're getting muddled, but like making sure you check people and sort of be a proxy for your allyship when certain people aren't in the room. But also, it's like you can join organizations, you can listen, you can have certain hard conversations with people. I think part of the real crux of what's the calcification that a lot of Black people feel is that our white allies, it's like, well, I tried to have a hard conversation, but everybody in my family voted one way. I didn't, because I'm the good one, but they all did that. And it's like, well, then you didn't do the hard work and the heavy lifting, right? That's the people who voted one way are going to listen to me, whether I'm on a TV network or in their living room. They will listen to you, but it's going to be sustained efforts. And so I think that to be a real ally is to recognize that you might go to the well and you might have to keep going back to the well. And it's going to be hard and arduous, but you have to keep doing it for the sake of the greater good, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Makeen?
I have nothing to add. I think that was perfectly said. And I saw my mom jump back on, so I guess it's time to go.
Spoken like a true daughter. That was perfect. Mom came in time to go. Thank you so much again. I know that Dr. Jay-Z
The
is
curfew.
going to write us out. Yeah, that was perfect. Dr. Greer started it with her mom and Makeen did it. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Dr. Greer and Makeen. Dr. Jay-Z, the floor is yours.
That is not why I jumped on.
But it was perfect timing. It made sense.
I saw you in the chat.
So anyhow, what I would say is when Makeen was little and she would have friends come over, we had a rule. If they didn't help you clean up, then you had to do it by yourself. And so therefore, I would hear her gathering her little friends saying, y'all are not leaving until y'all clean up. Right. And so maybe when we think about allyship and my people don't listen, y'all not going to leave till we clean up. Right? Because then you're gonna have to do the work by yourself. So I just put a pin in this conversation for now because we're now about 8 minutes over, and I'll just say thank you to Dr. Christina Greer, thank you to Joy Davis, thank you to Makeen Zachery, thank you to Sarah, thank you for all of our attendees who chimed in. I know we probably had more questions than we were able to get to, which is just indication that we need to have these conversations a little bit more often because we need community. That's the one thing I consistently heard around this conversation is the value of community. So on that note, we'll end, and I encourage you all to find your community and do not let them leave for you to clean up the mess on your own. Follow Dr. Greer's mama and look around. Thank you all and be well.